Hi folks, Andy Fionn here, Rambles with Robin and Ruby. In this video, we're going to continue our travel across the Canadian Shield from the Wawa area to Aaron Provincial Park, close to the Manitoba border. Pat Nokomis, an Ojibwe artist, described traveling across Ontario in 3 words: rocks, trees, and lakes. Rock, trees, and lakes. In this video, I'm going to give you a perspective as a driver, augmented with a little bit of geology, what it is like to actually drive across Ontario, and specifically the Canadian Shield. While it is very interesting, I think the summary by Pat Nokomis, Rocks, Trees, and Lakes, is very appropriate. Before we get too deeply into this video, let us remind ourselves what the Canadian Shield is. This image is a simplified bedrock geology map of part of North America. The different colors represent different types of rock. Those areas colored in shades of red and brown represent the geographic areas of exposed Canadian Shield rock. The Canadian Shield rocks are the oldest rocks in North America. The Canadian Shield rocks also form the core of the North American continent. Now, this heavy black line shows the general path of travel when you drive along the southern route of the Trans-Canada Highway across Ontario. As you see, the entire length of the drive through Ontario crosses the southern part of the Canadian Shield. Therefore, the rocks you see in the road cuts along the Trans-Canada Highway in Ontario belong to the Canadian Shield. Now, about those rocks. Yes, there are lots of rocks. There are low areas of rocks. There are rugged areas full of rocks. There are special rocks, like Mount McKay in Thunder Bay area. There are orange rocks, and there are orange and white rocks. There are tall gray rocks. But rocks can tell an interesting geological history of Ontario, going back almost 3 billion years. Rocks also contain hidden mineral resources. Let's consider 2 of those resources, copper and gold. One story of copper mining from the Canadian Shield is told by the storyboards located at the Tourist Information Station, where the road to Manitoba heads north from the Trans-Canada Highway. The old mining equipment stands as a testament to the past mining history of the area. In this area, copper was discovered in 1953. Mining began in 1957. And the copper resource was exhausted in 1995 when the last mine closed. Like other northern resource communities, the economy of Manitoba is now changing from extraction of a natural resource to recreational use of the natural resource. Gold in the Hemlo area is another example of a mineral that was formerly hidden in the Canadian Shield rock. The local First Nation people knew of that gold for at least hundreds of years. European settler and First Nation prospectors looked at promising areas in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. And there was an intensive prospecting interest that started in the early 1980s. Mining began in 1985, and mining continues to the time of this video in 2023. The Hemlo story is one that reminds us that within the Canadian Shield rock, mineral resources likely remain beneath our feet, hidden from our probing eyes. And did I mention the many lakes and rivers? There are thousands of water bodies on the Canadian Shield, and you'll see many of them along the Trans-Canada Highway. There are big lakes and little lakes. Yes, even some of the Great Lakes are visible along the Trans-Canada Highway in Ontario. For example, the new Nipigon Bridge, which opened in 2018, is an architectural and engineering marvel. But think about this. Every vehicle that passes along the Trans-Canada Highway over the Nipigon River must cross this bridge. Talk about a potential bottleneck should something untoward happen to the bridge. Many of these lakes and rivers serve an important recreational and commercial role in the local economies of the small communities that occur along the Trans-Canada Highway. And yes, it's hard to ignore that there are lots of trees along the Trans-Canada Highway. For a great distance, you are traveling through the Great Boreal Forest. One interesting observation is that the deciduous trees are late to leaf out where they are located close to Lake Superior. That is because the large, cold Lake Superior water body moderates the local climate. In fact, that climate is similar to a subarctic climate. That is why Arctic plants happily grow close to Lake Superior, despite being hundreds of kilometers south of their normal growing range. Now, some might say that the trees are not too exciting, but this boreal forest is the natural resource basis for a forest product industry that is the economic foundation for many of the smaller communities along the Trans-Canada Highway. So we should tip our hats to the trees and the rocks. Now, let's not forget that the boreal forest is a really important carbon repository that helps to mitigate the rising concentration of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. The boreal forest and all the trees that you see are star players in our attempt to mitigate the impact of climate change. The boreal forest deserves a second tip of our hat. So there are lots of rocks, lakes and trees along the Trans-Canada Highway in Ontario. But this past summer, I was also struck by the number of transport trucks that also use the Trans-Canada Highway. Chances are, the food you just bought from your grocery store or the kitchen appliance you just replaced also travel across Canada using the Trans-Canada Highway. There is an old joke that says in Canada there are two seasons, winter and road construction. Given that the Trans-Canada Highway is at least 3,000 kilometers long across Ontario, and that winter is long and cold, it should come as no surprise that there is also a lot of road construction along the Trans-Canada Highway in Ontario. Now I want to leave you with one last thought. Ontario is a very big province, and there are two Trans-Canada Highway routes across Ontario, shown here on this map. The southern route, shown in red, goes from Ottawa to Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, to Nipigon, to Thunder Bay, then to the Manitoba border. That route is about 2,200 kilometers long, or about 1,370 miles. The northern route, shown in yellow, goes from Ottawa to North Bay, then north to Cochrane, then west to Nipigon, over to Thunder Bay, and finally to the Manitoba border. That route is about 2,000 kilometers, or 1,240 miles long. And that explains in part why it takes us a minimum of 5 days to drive from Ottawa to Manitoba along the Trans-Canada Highway. So when you drive along the Trans-Canada Highway across Ontario, you will see lots of rock. You will see many lakes and rivers, and you will see many trees. You will drive at least 2,000 kilometers, or 1,250 miles. But the drive is beautiful, especially if you stop and look and enjoy. And that sums up this part of our travel from Wawa to Aaron Provincial Park in late May of 2023. The next distinctive part of Canada that lies ahead of us are the prairies. Join us in the next video as we continue our travel across the prairies of Canada as we head towards Yukon.